Hey y'all, welcome to another chill video where I can do whatever I want, and what I want is to make applesauce. So I'm gonna make applesauce while chatting about a big, complicated, loaded topic, because, just because it's chill doesn't mean we can't talk about the hard stuff, right? So I'm gonna make applesauce so that I don't have to make eye contact because I don't like to, and this gives me an excuse not to. While I chat with y'all about violence, but a specific kind of violence, and that is the kind of violence that people are talking about when they say things like, don't fight hate with hate, or don't fight fire with fire. You gotta be better than them, so just because they are attacking you doesn't mean that you should attack back. I'm going to be talking specifically about when a marginalized group, an oppressed group, a minoritized group, or individual is having some sort of violence enacted upon them, the reaction to that kind of violence that an oppressed or abused or marginalized person has when they respond to the violence being done to them with violence of their own. That kind of violence. And I'm going to get biblical with it because there's plenty of people who have been way more, eloquent than I can be in this casual chat about this topic, and I'll make sure to link some of those. For one, there's a quote I know of that's something about if you're being crushed, if your windpipe is being crushed, and so you react by stabbing the foot that's crushing your windpipe so you can get out of that situation, you're justified in doing so. And I think most people would agree, yeah, you're justified in doing so. Self-defense, right? For one thing, you don't have time to come up with a more peaceful option. You don't have breath to come up with a more peaceful option or just talk it out. You have to react immediately to save your own life. And yet, sometimes people will still say things like, don't fight fire with fire. I get where they're coming from, and I do believe for myself that I want to exhaust nonviolent means of resistance before I move to violence in most situations. But I 100% understand and support oppressed people who think otherwise, who say, no, the matter is so urgent. It's happening to me right now. I don't have time to think of more peaceful options, and I don't really have much hope that they'll work. So I'm going to be violent now. And I refuse to judge that. I refuse to judge that kind of reaction. Or to say that it's just as bad or they're just as violent as their oppressors when they're not. So I want to delve into some biblical examples because I think for people like me, for people of faith, it really helps in these difficult topics to see, what your holy texts say. What does the Bible say about using violence against oppressors? So let's dig in. Okay, so my first biblical example of this idea of violence and resistance and all, is actually an example in which, as far as we know, as far as the biblical text tells us, the person being oppressed does not react with violence, or at least not effectively. And it's the story of Joseph, my love Joseph of Genesis. I really love Joseph, and sorry if this gets confusing, but I am going to use they pronouns for Joseph when I talk about them. And I'll link y'all to like sort of my reasoning for why I feel like Joseph is an example of a transgender or gender nonconforming biblical figure. And therefore I kind of prefer not to use he pronouns with Joseph. Anyway, Joseph's dad, Jacob, gives Joseph a beautiful coat or dress, depending on how you translate it, this beautiful garment. And on top of that clear favoritism, supposedly favoritism, that's how the brothers interpret it, Joseph also has a tendency to tell their brothers about dreams they have in which all the brothers are bowing down before Joseph, and Joseph is lifted up above them, even though Joseph's younger than all of them, I think, except Benjamin, who isn't in this part of the story, I don't think. So the brothers, rightfully, I get it. They're jealous. They're angry that their little brother's getting uppity. But their response to Joseph is to get real violent, to gang up on Joseph, beat Joseph up, throw Joseph into a well in the desert to die. Huh, seems like a bad reaction. That's some violence right there. Um, Against someone who, Joseph was ganged up upon by like 10 people. They then, so magnanimously decide not to let him die, but to sell him to some slave traders. So instead of killing Joseph, they so graciously just sell them to slavery. Yeah, still violent, very violent. In that story, we don't know whether Joseph fought back, like how Joseph reacted to being shoved down a well and then sold to traders. Did Joseph try to fight? Did Joseph struggle? We don't know. But my sort of reason for bringing this up here is I think most of us, when we hear a story like this, whatever, even if we're the kind of person who says, yes, in no circumstance is violence the right answer, we must always find nonviolent solutions. Even then, most of those people, too, I think would agree, and correct me if I'm wrong, would agree that in this circumstance, when Joseph is being ganged up on by all these other people, Joseph has every right to, practice a little self-defense and fight back and try to save themselves. And if one of the brothers were to get hurt or even killed in the process of Joseph fighting for their own life, I think most people would say that's okay. Like, Joseph was justified in this. Joseph was justified in fighting back. And I don't know why that is. Is it because it's such a personal experience? It's such a concrete situation that most people can agree that yes, in that case, it's self-defense. And yet, those same people who would say, yeah, Joseph is justified if Joseph were to fight back, would then look at an example of, say, a protest where things start getting violent and the police escalate it and people are fighting back against the cops. People will look at that and say, well, why'd you fight them? You shouldn't have fought back. Why were you violent against them? What's the difference in these stories? I'd love to hear if anyone has sort of thoughts on that. Because just like Joseph, who is only one person against 10 men who gang up on Joseph, likewise, at a protest, even if there are more protesters than police, those police are trained professionals. They know how to fight, and they often have a lot of defense. They'll come in, what's it called? That real good armor. That real good armor stuff that the police like to wear to protests. I don't know. I don't know words. The police are the more powerful, the more equipped group. That's what, probably all the examples I can give in the Bible of the oppressed people responding with violence to the violence done to them. The reason they're being oppressed is because the oppressor has the power to oppress them, right? Either there are more numbers, the oppressor has more people to fight for them, or the oppressor has better weapons, more money, more power, more resources, technology, whatever, that allows them to be the oppressor. So let's look at my next example, which is in Exodus, where the entire Hebrew people are being enslaved, and God gets them out of it by, using plagues that act violence. They act violence upon the Egyptians. These plagues do. And at first, some of the earlier plagues also affect the enslaved Hebrews as well. They're sort of caught in that crossfire, you could say, of those earlier plagues. But most of them only affect Egyptians, including the death of the firstborn, which is quite an act of violence. And then, finally, Pharaoh says, okay, they can go. Pharaoh, who has had all the power and the control to be the oppressor, has finally been shown that actually you can't do this stuff without us fighting back. Moses tried words first. Moses tried to talk Pharaoh into letting the people go, and it didn't work, and it didn't work over and over again. So things got more and more violent, and violence was the tool that God and Moses used to get the people out of slavery, to the extent that when Pharaoh once again proves that he is out to get these Israelites, that even when he finally says, fine, they can leave, Pharaoh changes his mind again, proves he can't be trusted to let them go, that he's gonna wipe them out. He goes after them with his whole army. God, in response, wipes out the whole Egyptian army. Um, that is quite the act of violence. That seems to be, not only like God let it happen, but God is in that case, the agent of the violence. So just another example of a story where violence seems to be the only answer, the only way to get oppressed people out of the situation they're in. So was it wrong to use? So let's look at a few more stories where an oppressor who is doing a lot of violence is dealt with through assassination, through being killed. So we've got in the book of Judges, we have a story about a cool guy, bit of a roguish figure, left-handed, named Ehud, who goes and kills King Eglon because King Eglon is oppressing and exploiting the Israelite people. So the way Ehud kills him is actually portrayed with some humor in the book of Judges. He goes and he kills Eglon because he sees that as the way to end the violence being done to his people. And it works for a while, the people know peace for a while, and then some other oppressor shows up to continue the violence. And so I think that is one question, whatever side of this violence question you're on. I think when we're being oppressed and we choose to respond to it with violence, I think we do sort of have to, if we have the time, if it's not just a really quick reaction, if we have the time to consider what will the consequences of this violence be, will it really produce a lasting peace or safety for my people or for me, or are there going to be more violent consequences? Another example I can think of is back in Exodus, rewind to Exodus, when Pharaoh in chapter 1 says, all right, I'm going to kill all the Hebrew baby boys. And the two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who are such heroes of the Bible, they employ some deviousness. They lie to Pharaoh and say, oh, well, all the Hebrew women just have their babies before we can even get there. They're so strong and hardy, unlike you delicate Egyptians. So, we couldn't kill the baby boys like you said to because they're already born by the time we get there. So they respond to violence with that lie. What if they had responded to the violence by trying to assassinate Pharaoh? Would it have worked out for them? Well, probably they'd get executed by someone in Pharaoh's army, his guards or whatever. And probably a new Pharaoh would rise who would be, it's very possible, would be just as cruel, or even worse, to the enslaved Hebrews. And that's a problem when it comes to this idea of reacting to oppression with violence. Like, these midwives were just a few women, and they're up against an entire kingdom, an entire army. There's only so much they can do, and even what they do, which is to lie and save what baby boys they can, ends up not being enough. Because once Pharaoh sees that the midwives can't do what he wants them to do, he just sends soldiers to do it instead. And so the violence continues. There are baby boys who are killed. It's that question of, like, when we say things like, don't fight fire with fire, or don't, if you respond with violence, you're just as bad as they are. No, because usually the oppressed have way less power, way less ability to do damage. The amount of damage they can do is often going to be way less than the damage that the oppressor can do. So that's a false equivalency. Anyway, back to another story of oppressors being killed so that in order to stop the oppression. That's in the book of Esther. Esther's people are being oppressed by the Persians, and Haman, who's this counselor to the king, says, hey, how about we kill off all the Jews because I don't like them? And they're rude and they don't respect you. And this king's like, sure, yeah, why not? I'm going to issue an edict to my soldiers to tell them on a specific day and time to kill all the Jewish people. Does it sound familiar? Because this is why we need to fight anti-Semitism, people. This happens all the time throughout the centuries. And yeah, this is just one example in the Bible of the Jewish people, someone trying to stomp them out. And the way that Esther and Mordecai respond to this attempt of genocidal violence against their people is to go to the king and get the king to reverse the order. But the king can't reverse the order, he can just add to it. So he still tells his soldiers, okay, yeah, you gotta kill the Jewish people, or you gotta try, but the Jewish people have been armed and they have the weapons they need to kill the soldiers who try to kill them. And so the Jewish people kill a bunch of soldiers and they are not wiped out. And this is a wonderful victory. This is depicted as something to celebrate. Yet those of us who don't like violence, might get a little squeamish here, like, wait, but they just killed a bunch of people. Well, they were going to be killed if they didn't react in this way. What other choice did they have? It seems as though responding with violence was all they could do. And in this case, they were equipped. In our own day, if we don't like the way that oppressed people are responding to their oppression, instead of judging them for it, why don't we equip them with other ways to fight it? If we give them options besides violence, chances are they're going to take them most of the time. But when their only recourse is violence, it just seems like maybe we shouldn't be judging them, personally. Okay, so I haven't even gotten into the New Testament yet, but I don't want to go on too long, so I'm going to do one more story from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, that kind of bridges into the New, which is David. Now, David is a guy who's not scared to use violence when necessary. You know how he kills a lion? He's a shepherd. He kills a lion that's gonna attack a sheep, so that's pretty badass. And then he kills Goliath to protect his people. Again, pretty badass. He also is violent in other ways that are problematic, but the story of David having Bathsheba's husband killed, and then possibly using his power to get her to be with him, yeah, problematic. Hashtag problematic. But I'm talking about a different point in his life when he is being chased around by King Saul, his predecessor to the throne. King Saul really wants to kill David, just chasing him around, sending soldiers after him. And so David has been hiding in various caves to get away from Saul. And there's a kind of funny story. It's one of my favorite anecdotes in the Bible. Is David's hiding in a cave, and Saul's men happen to come across this cave, but they don't know that David's in there, and so they go to sleep, and David approaches in the dark, and he gets to Saul, and he could stab Saul through his heart. He could kill Saul, but instead he just rips off a little bit of Saul's robe as proof that, hey, I was here and I could have used violence against you. I could have killed you, but I chose not to. I chose instead to sort of make a statement, right? And so that Saul's really embarrassed and ashamed. And it also reminds me of Jesus' instruction to turn the other cheek in the Gospels. Jesus, when he's talking about this whole getting struck on the cheek thing, he's talking about the kind of violence that a master would do to a slave, or a husband might do to a wife, or someone who thinks they are superior to you, someone with power is going to do to you. They would use the back of their right hand to slap your cheek. This to them in their culture would signify, if you're using your backhand, it's saying, I know that you're beneath me, I'm better than you, I can strike you like this and you can't do a thing about it because I'm the one with the power. If you turn the other cheek to them, they can't backhand it, they can't hit it with the right hand backhand. They could use the back of their left hand, but that's the dirty, poopy hand, and you get in trouble for using that. You don't use that except for unclean things. They cannot use their left hand at all, and they cannot backhand you with their right hand on that cheek. If you imagine it, it's not gonna strike right. So what they would have to do if they want to hit you is make a fist. And if they hit you in the face with their fist, that culturally says they think that you are their equal. And so by turning the other cheek, you're actually exposing their violence for the cruelty and the senselessness that it is. you're saying, fine, go ahead and hit me again. Go ahead and claim that I'm your inferior and I can't fight back. Maybe I can't fight back with violence because I know I would never win. You have all the power, and if I hit you, I'm probably gonna, I don't know, go to jail or get beat worse. So instead, I'll turn my other cheek. Go ahead and hit that one too. Oh, that's right, you can't unless you think I'm your equal. And so it's like this really cool, like, badass radical thing, and I'll attach a link so you can read more about that. But to me, that's sort of another option, even though I believe that we shouldn't judge people who are in these dire situations, who are being oppressed or abused or whatnot. We shouldn't judge them if their response is violence. But also, there can be other ways besides violence, which might be to expose the violence for the evil that it is. So yeah, that's the video. I am, to close, gonna say, whatever your stance on this idea of violence and reacting to violence with violence, whether you agree with me, disagree, you think there needs to be more nuance, whatever. One, talk to me about it. I'd love to hear about it. Two, I just want to say, wherever you fall, I think it's very important for all of us to be looking forward to a future where none of that violence is necessary, where we can, as the Bible says, we can beat our swords into plowshares. And I don't know that we're ever going to get there in this world, but as a Christian, I do believe in a world to come in which the oppressed will be lifted up and the oppressors may be taken down a peg, and all put on this even level, and remorse will be necessary, and reform will be necessary, and rebuilding will be necessary. And I think it's important for us not to lose sight of that time when we won't have to use violence anymore. Whether we see it as something that should never get used or should only be used as a last resort, or that it can be used very effectively, whatever your viewpoint is, I think we all need to look forward to that day when violence is no more. So yeah, please comment, chat with me. Sorry this got long. Oh, I finished slicing these bad boys ages ago. To make applesauce, all you do is you peel and slice up some apples, put some saran wrap over this, pop it in the microwave, watch it so it doesn't explode, and in like 15 minutes, you have applesauce. And it's real good. I don't even add sugar. It's naturally sweet. Go make yourself some applesauce if you like apples. It's real fun. All right, bye.